The moment she said it, the entire room seemed to stop breathing. It wasn't just the weight of her words, it was the way she said them, calm and composed, as if she were asking him to pass a file, not to step into a lie that could change both their lives forever. Sunlight streamed through the glass walls of the office, painting golden reflections across the polished floor, but the warmth never reached him. Arav Qureshi stood frozen, his hand still resting on the back of a chair, his mind trying to process what he had just heard. A CEO had just asked him, a single father juggling life between his son and a modest job, to pretend to be her boyfriend, and his reply would change everything. Before we step further into this story, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the unexpected ways life brings people together, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Home with Dad. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. Arav wasn't a man who lived in illusions. His world had been stripped down to essentials long ago: work, home, and his 5-year-old son Rehan. Every morning began the same way. Sunlight sneaking through thin curtains, the soft hum of the city waking up, and Rehan's sleepy voice calling out for him. It was a life built on routine, on quiet sacrifices, and on an unspoken promise that no matter how hard things got, he would never let his son feel alone. There had been a time when Arav dreamed bigger, a time when laughter filled his home, when there was someone else to share the weight of life with. But that chapter had closed abruptly, leaving behind silence and responsibilities that came crashing down like a storm he never saw coming. Since then, he had learned to survive, not to expect. Working as a mid-level financial analyst at Veritas Group wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. Stability was everything to him. It paid the bills, kept food on the table, and ensured Rehan had a future brighter than his own past. He stayed quiet, kept his head down, and avoided anything that could disrupt the fragile balance of his life, which is why standing in the CEO's office, facing her request, felt like stepping onto a completely different planet. Naira Siddiqui was not someone people said no to. She was known across the company as a woman of precision and power. Her decisions were swift, her expectations high, and her presence alone commanded respect. Yet there was something about her today that felt different. Not weaker, but human in a way Arav had never seen before. Her eyes, usually sharp and unreadable, carried something heavier, something tired. She had explained it quickly, almost as if saying it faster would make it easier to bear. Her parents were visiting. They had expectations, questions she couldn't answer honestly, pressure she didn't want to confront alone. And somehow, in all the people she could have chosen, she had chosen him, Arav. A man who barely spoke beyond work emails and polite greetings. Single father who rushed out of the office every evening to pick up his son. A man who had no business being part of her world. His first instinct had been to refuse. Every part of him screamed that this was a mistake, that stepping into her life, even temporarily, would complicate things in ways he couldn't afford. But then something unexpected happened. He looked at her again, really looked this time, and saw not the CEO, but a daughter who was asking for help. That was when his reply came, quiet but firm, carrying a weight she hadn't anticipated. He told her yes, but only on one condition. He wouldn't lie about having a son. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. For a moment, Naira simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. It wasn't the answer she expected. Most people would have agreed eagerly, bending themselves into whatever shape she needed. But Arav had drawn a line, not out of defiance, but out of something deeper: integrity and love. He couldn't erase his son, not even for a day, not even for convenience. Rehan was not a complication to hide. He was the center of his world. Something shifted in her eyes then. Respect, perhaps, or curiosity, she agreed. The arrangement was simple. They would spend one afternoon together, meet her parents at their home, and play their roles convincingly enough to avoid suspicion. No strings attached, no complications. At least, that's what they both believed. The day arrived brighter than usual, as if the world itself had decided to watch what would unfold. Arav stood outside Naira's family home, adjusting the collar of his shirt. His heart beat louder than he cared to admit. He wasn't nervous about pretending. He was nervous about being seen by people who lived in a world so different from his own, seen as someone who didn't belong. Inside, Naira's parents were everything he expected and more. Warm, observant, and quietly discerning. They welcomed him politely, but their eyes lingered, measuring, questioning. It wasn't hostility, it was concern, the kind only parents could carry. As the afternoon unfolded, Arav found himself stepping into conversations he never imagined having. About life, values, family. He didn't pretend to be someone else. He spoke honestly, carefully, but without hiding the truth of who he was. And then came the moment that changed everything. Rehan called. Arav hesitated only briefly before answering. He stepped aside, his voice softening instantly, warmth flooding into every word. It was a simple conversation, about lunch, about a toy, about how much his son missed him, but it carried a depth that couldn't be faked. When he turned back, the room had changed. Naira's parents were watching him differently now, not as a stranger, but as a man, a real one. The rest of the day passed in a blur of quiet realizations. Naira found herself noticing things she had never paid attention to before. The way Arav listened more than he spoke, the way he chose his words with care, the way his entire demeanor shifted when his son was involved. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply being himself. And that was far more powerful. For Arav, the experience was equally unsettling. He had stepped into a world of elegance and ease, where problems were discussed over tea instead of endured in silence. Yet despite the difference, he didn't feel as out of place as he expected. Because somewhere between the conversations and the quiet moments, he realized something. Naira wasn't as untouchable as she seemed. She was just alone in a different way. Days turned into weeks, and what was meant to be a one-time arrangement began to blur into something more complicated. They returned to work, back to their roles, but something had changed between them, a familiarity, a quiet understanding. They spoke more, not just about work, but about life, about struggles, about choices they had made and the ones they wished they could undo. For Naira, it was unfamiliar territory. She had spent years building walls, convincing herself that vulnerability was a weakness she couldn't afford. But Arav's presence didn't demand anything. It simply existed, steady and grounding. For Arav, it was dangerous, because for the first time in years he felt something beyond responsibility. He felt hope, and hope, he knew, could be fragile. The turning point came on a bright afternoon when Naira insisted on meeting Rehan. Arav hesitated, every instinct telling him to protect the small, safe world he had built for his son. But something in her sincerity made it hard to refuse. When they finally met, it wasn't grand or dramatic. It was simple. Rehan looked at her with curiosity, then smiled with the easy trust only children possess. And in that moment, something inside Naira softened in a way she couldn't explain. She wasn't just seeing Arav anymore. She was seeing his world, and it was beautiful in its honesty. But life doesn't allow such fragile happiness to grow without testing it. The truth, as it always does, began to surface. Rumors spread at work, questions were asked, and the line between pretense and reality became impossible to ignore. Naira was forced to confront something she had been avoiding. What started as a lie had become real, and real things demand real choices. Arav, on the other hand, began to pull away, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. He had seen what losing everything felt like once before. He couldn't risk putting his son through that again. The distance between them grew, filled with unspoken words and unanswered questions, until the day everything finally came to a head. Under the same golden sunlight where it all began, Naira stood in front of him, no longer the CEO, no longer the woman in control of everything, just a woman who had realized what she was about to lose. She didn't ask him to pretend this time. She asked him to stay, not as a favor, not as a lie, but as something real. And Arav, for the first time, didn't answer immediately. Because this wasn't just about him. It was about Rehan. It was about trust. It was about whether two people from completely different worlds could build something strong enough to last. So he did. Something unexpected. He asked his son, and the answer came in the simplest way possible. A small smile, a nod, and a question that carried more wisdom than any adult could offer. Will she stay? That was the moment everything changed, because love, Arav realized, wasn't about perfection or certainty. It was about choosing to stay, even when it was hard, even when it was uncertain. And so, he said yes, not to the arrangement, not to the lie, but to a future they would build together, honestly, imperfectly, and with all the courage it required. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe in second chances and the quiet strength of ordinary people, take a moment to like, share, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. And before we end, here's a special request. Comment, kindness still.